Come on in, guys. Grab a seat. It's good to see you all here. Thanks for coming. Tonight we have a real special guest to chat with us this evening. Welcome to the Brooksville, Florida RTB chapter meeting, held the first Tuesdays of every month at 6:30 p.m. here at Stable Faith Cowboy Church in Brooksville, Florida. Tonight we have with us Jeff Zweerink. Try to say that name with me, Zweerink. Zweerink, very good, excellent. You guys are doing great. Jeff is an astrophysicist. This is what I put in my email, Jeff, and I know you can't see me unless I poke my head down here. But this is what I put in the email. I said, Jeff is an astrophysicist, an RTB scholar, which means he's on staff, bless you, he's on staff at RTB at Reasons to Believe, and he is full-time there, and an all-round good guy. That's what I put in the email, if you all caught that. I had the opportunity to have lunch with Jeff and others at the God Is conference in St. Louis last November, and we got to talking about artificial intelligence and a couple of other things. And I'm very excited to have him with us here tonight to chat with us about that same topic. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Jeff and let him take the stage.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And this is just a topic that I've been thinking a lot about over the last few years, in part just because I have a love of learning how to program computers. I mean, when I was in graduate school, I was working on this project, and this was back in the 90s, back before computers were particularly prevalent everywhere. And the things that I needed to do our research, we had this detector that had 100 different pixels on it, and we expanded it out to 500 eventually. But to analyze the data, we had to take all of the readings from each of these pixels. We would get events at a rate of about 50 times a second, and we would have to do calculations on this. And so there were these very sophisticated programs that we had to write. And in order to do that, I'd done a little bit of basic programming in middle school, a little bit of Pascal in high school, a little bit of Fortran in college. And the language du jour at the time was C. And so I actually sat down and just got a book, K&R-C, and started reading through it, learned how to program, kind of largely taught myself how to do that. And have just been fascinated by the things you can do with computer programs. And one of the things that stood out to me as I was doing that was I wanted to automate our data analysis so that the detector took the data, it stored it at night, I would transfer it up to Iowa State. This was back before most web browsers showed up, and so you could actually transfer the data pretty quickly, at least until about 95, and then after that, web browsers started showing up, and I had to transfer it earlier in the morning so that people weren't looking at pictures while I was doing that. But we had a log where we would take notes of what the run number was and what kind of run it was and what the time duration was and a whole bunch of comments. And the way we took data was to have a time where we would take a particular kind of calibration. There were two kinds of calibration runs we had to take. And then we would take data where we would observe one region of the sky, and then we would observe that same region of the sky without the source in it, or our expected source. And so to do the analysis, you had to line up or figure out which on run went with the off run, figure out which two calibration runs went with it, and then do the analysis. And to make this all the more complicated, sometimes we would take the on run and then the off run. And sometimes we would take the off run and then the on run. And then sometimes we would just take what was called a tracking run, where we would just look at what the source region of the sky was. And so when you looked at this log file, I found this very interesting thing, that if I looked at it, I could almost instantly say, oh, here's how that all works out. When I had to write a program that could parse all that, though, it became very, 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 very difficult. These things that were just intuitive to me were very difficult to put into a program. I could read the information in, but it was very difficult to kind of work through all the logical steps that my mind did without me thinking. And to get to that, what I actually had to do was go back and say, okay, what are the steps I'm doing? And I found out there were certain lines I was just throwing out because there were words in them. And so I coded that into my program, and there were ways to figure out which of these calibration runs. And so I applied my logic. And once I figured out the logic, then I could actually start coding it. And it took me the better part of 2 or 3 days to figure all that out and write up a program that could parse this file that by eye, I could just do like that. And that's what, not that AI is doing that, but that's the sort of stuff that AI is thinking, or when we're pursuing artificial intelligence, this is the thing that we're thinking about doing. How to take the things that humans just do. Sometimes we can identify the steps involved, sometimes we just kind of know, but how do we do that and teach computers how to do that and presumably do it the way we do it, or in some sort of intelligent way? And often what you'll see as you look through the history of artificial intelligence is this idea that if we can just do this, then we've got something that's intelligent. And one of those first things was, could we just get a program to play chess? Because chess has a lot of different things involved in it. And if we can just get a program that can play chess as well as humans, then we've got something that is intelligent. Well, you know by now that we've got programs that can play chess, but we don't really consider them intelligent. And so what I have started to do, or as I've thought about this, as we're thinking about artificial intelligence, we could get way down in the weeds of how do you program this and what's the logic, and do you actually start out with postulates and build a logical system on top of that? Do you build up a huge database that you can now use that to find patterns and correlations? And I'm not going to get so much into that as I am going to say, all right, we're pursuing this quest to make artificial intelligence. What do we do? How do we think about that? And what, as we understand what's going on with artificial intelligence, how does Christianity come into play with that? And I'm going to show some slides here. So I'm going to share my screen. And you're going to just talk about some of the things that I have thought about as I'm pondering what we're doing when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And as I'm thinking about all this, one of the things that I've become aware of is that you kind of break this down into 3 big questions in my mind. One, is AI doable? As in, can we actually accomplish that? 2, is AI good? And 3, is AI human or intelligent or sentient? But, really we're trying to build something or to make something that kind of has human characteristics, if will it. And so, kind of weighing in on that last question, is it human? And so I just kind of want to look at those 3 questions. And to address the first question, that is AI doable, one of the first things we need to get is, what is artificial intelligence? Because if you were to ask many people my age and older, when they think of artificial intelligence, they're thinking of the R2-D2s, the C3POs, the Jarvises, the Johnny Fives, the Hals, the Daryls, these computer programs that become sentient, aware of who they are, and we're wrestling with, do we give them rights? How do we interact with them? Do we shut them down? Are they tools? These are the sorts of questions. But as we're dealing with artificial intelligence as it's talked about now, that's just a small subclass of what we're talking about with artificial intelligence. And that you can kind of break it down into 3 categories. And the first category is what's often referred to as artificial narrow intelligence. And this is the bulk of the stuff we're going to talk about today in terms of artificial intelligence. This is Alexa or Siri. These are chess games. These are automated cars, language translators, natural language processors like ChatGPT, the app in your refrigerator that says, hey, we're low on eggs. Let me call the store and order more eggs. Those are all examples of artificial narrow intelligences. And what these do, They correlate inputs with outputs, and they're designed to do a specific task. For example, what do I mean by that? There are AIs out there that play chess, and the original chess programs, what they would do was they'd play chess kind of largely the way we would. There would be an opening, there was a mid game, there was an end game that was in play there, and so the chess program there were these algorithms of how humans think about it, and so they would code that and strategies put in there, and eventually just kind of by sheer computational power, these AIs, if you will, ANIs, artificial narrow intelligences, could just see and do better than humans could do at playing the game. But if you now took that chess program and said, oh, let's go play checkers, it had absolutely no capacity to do that because it was designed to play chess. It was narrow in its intelligence in that it couldn't, the AI could not take that knowledge and apply it somewhere else. And we even have fairly sophisticated AIs today that will play chess, some that you can actually just say, here are the rules to chess. They can make these moves. This is the objective. The AI will play against itself. It will learn how to play, and it will very rapidly become better than humans at playing chess. And you can take this same AI and have it do the same with shogi or go, which are similar types of strategy games. And they will play those better than humans. But fundamentally, what the AI is doing is saying, I'm learning how to do this. And then I'm learning how to do this. And then I'm learning how to do this. But it's not saying, oh, in chess, you're wanting to do this. Well, if I adopt that strategy when I play shogi, this is how I would play. It's not taking that knowledge and applying it somewhere else. So it's saying, given this set of inputs, these are the outputs. And it can do specific tasks incredibly well. And that's contrasted with the second type of AI, which is artificial general intelligence. And that is, what humans would have. This is where we can rationally apply acquired knowledge in other areas. So I can go play checkers, learn that there's a basic strategy. It's like, okay, there's ways to trap players. There's kings are more powerful than just regular chess or checkers. And I can take that knowledge and say, all right, queens are more powerful than pawns. There's ways to trap. The mechanisms by which it plays out are more complicated, but nonetheless, I can take the strategy I learned in one place and apply it in a different area without having to relearn everything from scratch. And that's, again, this artificial general intelligence. And so typically, an aspect of artificial general intelligence is that there's a capacity to say, ooh, I want to learn this, and then be able to go out and execute and figure out how to do that. So I need to find someplace that can repair my phone. So I can say, well, I can go look at the yellow pages. I can look on the web. I can walk up and down the street. But I know there's an entirely new task. Nobody said, hey, go learn how to figure out where you get a phone repaired. I can come up with the problem and go about figuring out how to solve it just based on what I've learned so far in areas that are not specifically tied to that. And so that, again, that's why I use that term. We rationally applies acquired knowledge in other arenas. And as good as the artificial narrow intelligences are, none of them do this. Even when you're talking about automated cars, for example, it's a string of whole bunch of narrow intelligences. There are AIs that read the sensors and say, oh, this is what it means. There are other AIs that say, given this data, it means that this is the route to go, or I want to turn left. So there are a whole bunch of narrow intelligences put together, but still all of these narrow intelligences are just doing the things they're designed to do, not learning how to do things outside what their narrow field of knowledge, if you will. And then the third category is what's called an artificial superintelligence. And this is just a general intelligence, but given the computation power of the best computer systems we could buy, they could presumably acquire the ability to do the things that humans can do, only just do them far faster, far more intelligently, and far more efficiently. And so the idea behind that is think of, if you talk about our chess AIs, for a while, AIs could not do the same, you could not beat humans. After a while, the AIs, the chess programs could beat humans, but we were kind of at the same level. But as we continue to develop the technology, the chess programs now are so advanced that even the best humans can't even begin to compete with them. And so now just imagine that not just in this narrow region, but in general as well. So that's the idea behind an artificial superintelligence. And so kind of one way to maybe think about this, or a nice picture to think about this, is that we can look at the intelligence that exists today on a staircase. And you've got over here on the side, or down below, you've got ants. They've got some minimal form of intelligence. Chickens have more, maybe apes there. We're up at the top, highest step so far on the intelligence staircase. And if you ask where are all the current ANIs, they're down here kind of really on the low rungs. They can do certain things very well, but they don't have the general intelligence to function. So like an ant can go find food, bring food back. That's about all it can do. It can't decide, hey, I want to know, why does the sun shine that way? It just doesn't have the capacity to do that. The AGIs that we tend to talk about, the R2D2s, the C3POs, those sorts of things, tend to have an intelligence in the class of humanity. They may be, down around the chimpanzees in terms of small, less intelligence. They may be a little bit brighter than us or able to know more knowledge, but generally the hypothetical AGIs you see around tend to be in this class. For the superintelligence, if we take all of that and then just say, all right, let's zoom out a little bit, our biological range, all the stuff we were talking about, is now down here in this region. This artificial superintelligence is way up there. So just know, even on our best days, no human is going to be able to compete with the knowledge and computational power of a presumed artificial superintelligence. And so this is, again, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we need to know, are we talking narrow intelligence? Are we talking general intelligence? Are we talking superintelligence? And so if we ask that question, and why we're even beginning to ask that question, is we can actually talk about how much we can compute, because for everything else our brain may be, it does computations. And so we can ask the question, are the computational power of the computers that we build now, are they beginning to approach what humans can do? And if you, pick whichever, there's probably many ways to do that, but here's one from Ray Kurzweil, who's very much of the opinion that we're going to make artificial superintelligence at some point in time. You can plot and say, as the, calculations per second per $1,000. So that's just some way of characterizing this. You can go along and say, all right, well, we're kind of the artificial, or what we can program and build technology to do, is kind of increasing on this exponential curve. You can say, an insect brain is there, which we've kind of passed that. Actually, if you were to update the data, we're kind of on the level of a mouse brain, still well below a human brain, but depending on how rapidly this exponential rises, it's not too distant future where you might be able to do that. And even once you get there, it's not too long before this computational power will exceed the combined capacity of all human brains. And so there's this idea that as we continue to make more and more computationally powerful computers, we're going to have the capacity now to develop an intelligence that rivals the human brain, and maybe even all human brains at some point in time. Now, there's a hardware component to that, but then there's also a software component to that. And the software component shows up in that you've got to be able to have programming that tells how all these computations work together. And what's interesting about that is that our current approach has taken, let's just accumulate a lot of data, and let's find patterns in that data so that we can associate when this set of patterns arises, when this set of input comes up, when we see this set of input, that means this sort of output is what is expected or desired. And you could even make it so that the program can kind of adjust its this quote unquote decision making process so that all of the calculations or the weighting of various things could be adjusted based on, well, when the AI saw this input, it gave that output, and get feedback says the people said, yeah, that was good, that was good, that was a good explanation, so that would strengthen those weights, or said, no, I was really looking for that. Then the AI in principle could go in and adjust its inputs, again, all because of what humans have programmed it to do. But it really is basically seeing input and correlating with output. And what's fascinating about that is that, you've heard the saying, correlation is not causation. So it's correlating this input and that output, but for all intents and purposes, it's deterministic both directions. If I see this input, that's that output. That output means I saw that input. It's not really doing what we are doing, because we say, okay, well, I see that input, I got that output. Well, what would it take to make a different output? I can ask that question, or I can say, well, okay, that's the output. Could I find other ways that of getting that output? And so as humans, we're doing more than just input to output or seeing and observing. We actually can go in and do things and intervene. So for example, the AI might say, well, people who bought toothpaste also bought toothpicks. But what the AI can't do is say, well, if you increase the price of toothpaste to twice as expensive, will people still buy toothpicks? See, now I'm intervening in there, and I'm doing something that may not, not only am I intervening, I may be making up something that's impossible to understand. So it's not just, in principle, you could get data that would say whether if the toothpaste is twice as expensive, how does that affect people buying toothpicks? But I can go and ask the question, what would have happened yesterday when everybody was buying toothpaste if I had increased the price 5 times? See, there is no data about what would have happened yesterday, because yesterday's already passed. But I can imagine this, look back in retrospect and try and understand what's going on so that I can predict what's going on. And these are things, even the simple, even babies do these sorts of things. So not only do we obviously we associate, but we also intervene and then do things where you are imagining what's not even, or you're dealing with things that are not even there or couldn't possibly be there. We routinely, in fact, we do that all the time. What's interesting though is that from a software perspective, we all have heard, again, the probability input or correlation is not causation. But once you start recognizing that there is causation, okay, the people who buy toothpaste are concerned about their teeth. Those people will also buy toothpicks because they're concerned about their teeth. Or maybe a better way, if you can correlate that people who have headaches buy aspirin. And you could say, okay, the more headaches go up, the more aspirin is going to go up. You will see that correlation. But what that doesn't, the association or just the seeing that level one, just the seeing would say, well, oh, aspirin went up. That means headaches went up. Well, aspirin has nothing to do with causing headaches. Headaches cause people to go buy aspirin. And when you incorporate that sort of causation, now you actually open up avenues to build software that can allow you to move beyond correlation into what does it take to intervene and counterfactuals. And what that requires is causal knowledge. And so there's actually the possibility that we can build software that allows computers to do the sort of stuff that we just intuitively or very naturally do. And so if we now ask the question, is AI doable? I think if you break it down and say, all right, we've got to look at these in 3 different classes. Is artificial narrow intelligence doable? Well, yes, absolutely. It's already here. We do this. This has been done repeatedly all the time. Can we do artificial general intelligence? Well, I think that's a worldview type issue, because I would argue as a Christian, we might be able to if God has given us that capacity. because you think about where our ability to think and reason and be aware of the world, there's a sentience or a consciousness that we have that allows us to be in the world, but also see our place in the world. And the question is, has God given us the capacity, and more specifically, theologically, we have that because we're made in God's image. So the question is, has God made us in his image in a way that it will allow us to imbue some other created thing with that image? I could make an argument that it's no, but I can't rule out that God might have given us that capacity. What about superintelligence, though? I think the answer to this is no, because I think it seems inconsistent with God's mandate. Because if you think about it, God has given humanity charge of the planet to rule over it and subdue it. Now, we are capable of building things that, when we use them improperly, will allow us to destroy the planet. That might, if we intentionally worked at it hard, we could destroy the planet. But with an artificial superintelligence, there's a distinction that's important in my mind. We would have still built the thing that allowed the superintelligence to grow. But once it's there, it's not within our capacity to control it or determine what's done. So I think God has, in giving us stewardship, allowed us to do things that might harm or destroy the planet. Would he give us the sort of thing that allows us to build something that, outside of any input from us, is capable of destroying the planet? I don't think that's the case. I mean, these are things that Christians can disagree on. And again, part of the argument, I would say, it is, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's great to have debate, discussion, argument about general and superintelligence. The reality of it is, when we're talking about artificial intelligence that exists or will exist for the next 20, 30, 40 years, we're talking about artificial narrow intelligence. And so there are two different discussions. There are theological, philosophical discussions about whether it's possible to build general and superintelligence, but there's a practical, we've built narrow intelligence, what are we going to do with it now? And so that's kind of what I would like to now focus on, is say, all right, if we can do that, is this good or bad? Is AI good or bad? And as I've looked at this, what I've recognized is that there's a lot of promise to AI. Some of the examples that come up, you talk about medical technology or medical uses. We can do X-ray screening. We can do where you actually train an AI to look at X-rays, and those AIs are better at detecting pathologies than human doctors are. And not only that, the AI can look at multiple ones of these very quickly, and the AI never gets tired, never needs a break, never had a bad day where they might just miss something. It's a more reliable, more efficient, more accurate way of doing these things that we've developed that need to happen. You can do the same thing with stroke detection, even just having AIs that analyze facial and body movements to detect strokes, or facial and voice statements that allow to detect depression. So AIs could be a very powerful tool that help us diagnose patients better so that they can get better treatment. Just from a technology perspective, we have automated cars. One can make an argument, and I really don't like this argument because I love driving, but automated cars are just going to have a lot fewer accidents. I think it's a little bit of a problem what happens when an automated car gets into an accident, but there are just going to be fewer accidents out there. You can make flying scarecrows that will scare off critters better than having somebody just standing out in the field. So you're going to get better crop yields. You can build AIs that will look through all of the different databases of chemicals and compounds and ask the questions, which ones could we use to make better batteries, so that we get longer battery lives with fewer recharge with more recharge cycles and better power output from them. And so instead of humans having to wade through all that, we can build AIs that can search through the literature and do that. And so we can just build technology that will benefit humanity. And even just human aids. I mean, making digital assistants and language translators. I remember going over to Europe back in the 80s, And I took a little bit of German in high school, and I ran into a person who knew a little bit of English. And between the two of us, we were able to have a 5-year-old conversation. But now I could go to Germany with a language translator that just comes on my phone and have a reasonable conversation with most any country I want to go into. And so just things that aid humans in being able to communicate, develop relationships, interact better, to be more efficient, to spend the time on the things that are more important. There's just a lot of promise out there in the technology that AI can bring. But for all of those promises, there's also perils associated. So if you look at, one aspect that comes up is social manipulation. This same AI that allows a doctor to go scan an X-ray and find pathologies is the same sort of AI that says, oh, given this person's online profile, this sort of ad will be more efficient at making them buy something. I can actually point you to studies that show how manipulating search engine results, not the top one, not the first hit you get, but if you can actually just change the pro or con against particular candidates or issues in the third and fourth hit result on a search engine, you can actually change the voting percentage in election by 1 to 2%. Well, most of the elections in the United States are decided by 1 to 2%. So you can actually rig elections. You can make images and videos of people saying stuff that they disagree with. I mean, you could go out and make a video of me saying, oh yes, the earth is only 10,000 years old and everything I've been saying about it has been wrong. You shouldn't believe anything. And you could make that look realistic so that people can't tell the difference. And the better we get at making or detecting the fakes, the way these fakes are made is that the better we get at detecting them, that goes into the algorithm that helps us make them better. So it's not like we can just kind of keep ahead of the technology and be aware. Eventually, these fakes are going to be so good that you can't tell whether they're actually the person's actually saying that or not. And so the same technology that gives us this medical screening is also the technology that allows us to manipulate people. You know, technology, you could build a driving car, but you can also build an automated assassin. In fact, it wasn't too many years ago, there was at least one example of a drone that went out and actually killed somebody, presumably with nobody giving a command that says to go do that. And, you know, you talk about things with your self-driving cars. You know, you and I are driving down the road, I'd make a mistake and I hit you. We kind of know how to handle that because the insurance is going to determine who's at fault. And even if I cause something that you can't pay, somehow we know how to deal with people and deal with the emotions that flow out of that. But if a car is doing that, there's just something impersonal about the car being at fault, you know. And so they're just these weird perils that show up when you're dealing with automated technology. And even when you're looking at those human aids, one of the questions you have to ask is, okay, if we're developing things that allow humans to do, most of the jobs that do that are the less skilled labor, if you will. You know, and so if you're taking those less skilled things, it makes them cheaper. Now, just look at what we do at McDonald's. Used to be there was a bevy or a slew of 4 or 5 people up there taking orders and getting things. Well, now, as kiosks have become available, what's happened? We no longer employ people to do that. Now, the idea has been, well, we no longer do that so people can get retrained and go out and do other things. But I've come to appreciate there are people who are just really skilled at physical or manual labor. And if you start doing things where you take away certain sectors of our economy, you could very easily create a group of people who struggle to find gainful employment. And you may even induce dependency of other things. Dependency, for example, of, you know, what happens if we build tractors or farming equipment that just goes out and takes care of growing the entire seed? What happens if they don't work? Are humans going to have lost the knowledge that allows them to be able to do things? We could actually become so dependent on the technology that if the technology doesn't function, we now no longer how to do it. And so these are some of the perils that exist when you're dealing with AI. And as I've been thinking about AI and asking the question, is it good? What I realize is that's actually the wrong question. Because when you're talking about something being good, that's a statement of morals. And technology is not moral. Technology is a physical thing, it's a tool, if you will. Now, I have no doubt that AI will be a really powerful tool, but if we're going to talk about is AI good, the question that comes to mind is, will we as humans use it well? Because in the words of the immortal wise philosopher Benjamin Franklin Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Will we develop the character and responsibility and wisdom to use these tools well? And the argument I want to make is that if we want to do that consistently and reliably in a way to mitigate the perils and maximize the promise of AI, we want Christianity to be true. Before I articulate that or expand on that last point, though, I just want to, I want to go back and highlight a couple of things. And this is kind of getting at the nature of AI, because I remember back in 1997, Gary Kasparov had played Deep Blue back in 96. He won 4-2. Come around 1997, plays again, and the machine finally wins. And I remember thinking in 96, the humans are still on top. And then in 97, think, well, that was short-lived. And I remember just kind of this almost not depression, but just kind of a deflated, well, the machines have finally overtaken us in this way. What I found interesting, though, is what happened with the machine that did that. Because Deep Blue was the name of the machine. The next day, they disassembled the machine. The machine wasn't out there celebrating its victory. It didn't take a victory lap. It wasn't elated, ecstatic. It didn't think anything. The people who built the machine simply unplugged it, took it apart, scrapped it for parts, and went on to the next project. There's something very different about the AI that played chess and the person that played chess. And that's all the more remarkable when you think of what we've accomplished with AIs. I was describing AIs that play chess, and I was talking about AlphaGo. This AI shows superhuman play of chess, shogi, and Go, and it's not 3 different programs. It's one program that has learned how to play all 3 games. Pluribus is a AI that can actually play multiple poker experts either individually or simultaneously and routinely defeats them. What's interesting about Pluribus is that it's actually implementing an algorithm, which is, or a strategy, if you will, working towards a Nash equilibrium, which that's kind of the highlight of John Nash in that movie, A Beautiful Mind, what he came up with. It's actually implementing an equilibrium developed by John Nash, and that's how it goes about playing poker and defeating them. And it just does it consistently better, more so than humans that are going to play it. Watson beat the best experts at Jeopardy. And what's funny is that they took Watson and started to try and work it over or have it work inside the healthcare industry. And while it was really good at Jeopardy, it never did materialize in its ability to help in the medical industry. And so we've got a huge growing list of AIs that can write essays. And, we talked about ChatGPT recently, but if you ask the question, is it human? What's interesting is that these AIs have no sense of accomplishment. There's no interest or awareness of relationships, even with ChatGPT, and I'll come back to that in a second. They're successful largely in controlled environments or in implementing human-discovered strategies. And they have minimal capacity to apply knowledge in one area to a different one. So are these things human? Well, you ask what a human is, and it's like, well, we're physical and spiritual, and it's got these physical capacities, but no spiritual capacities. we're highly rational and emotional. There's no emotional content or even really any rational content because these AIs are just implementing algorithms. They're not actually thinking, if you will. We're inherently relational. We're self-aware. We know right and wrong. We make decisions independent of circumstances. We're charged with dominion. So are these things human? No, they're not. But why I highlight these aspects of humanity is going back to a statement I made about how if we're going to develop AI, we want Christianity to be true. And what I mean by that is that we want people to believe and act as though Christianity is true. And why that's important, just to kind of give one small example. I go back to in the 1970s and 80s when I was born and growing up, you would get prank phone calls, you'd get telemarketers call on the phone and want to sell you this, that. Actually, even before that, you'd have people walk up to your door and say, hey, I'm selling this. And what if you've been well trained, what you're taught is that these people, the bulk of them, are actually trying to sell you something that probably isn't as good. They're always overselling, and it's rarely as good as they're making it out to be. And I remember being out actually at Kmart once in the middle of the winter in the Midwest with my sunglasses on. And I walk into the store and there's a guy saying, hey, come here, check this out. Because my glasses had fogged up and I was trying to rub them off. He goes, watch this. So if you'll allow me to take your glasses. So he took my glasses, put this stuff on, wiped it, polished it, nice and clean and everything. Put your glasses back on. He says, and he had a little fog machine that could blow warm air on my cooler glasses. And it's like, look, it won't fog up. And it was $5, back in the 1980s, $5 kind of meant something. So I remember driving home and I was contemplating going to get $5. And so I asked my dad, I said, hey, Dad, this is what's going on there. And I kind of explained it to him. And his comment to me has been tremendously helpful for the rest of my life since then. He goes, Jeff, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And his statement was, I generally just don't do things like that. And so I went back and moved on to my other things. And his advice helped me understand that there are hucksters out there trying to take advantage of me. And so now you've got telemarketers calling you on the phone saying, hey, I'm from such and such. Oftentimes they're lying about what they're doing, trying to get you to give money. Sometimes they're actually legitimate. Sometimes they're actually just trying to take advantage of you. But that technology, as phones became more relevant, they started to use phones. And then in the 90s, when email was around, you'd start getting hey, I am a Nigerian prince and my money is locked up in such and such. If you will just send me $1,000, I'll sit, and so now it's starting to prey on people's, one, desire to get money, and two, willingness to trust people, and actually starting to take advantage. And in fact, I think there was a correlation that the older you were, the more likely you were to be taken advantage, because it's utilizing these things that people used to use. There were tools that people used to build relationships, and they're now taking advantage of those to make money or to get to scam you. Why I bring all that up, because now you're starting to get emails where they look like they're from Amazon, and there's just some little bit that's a little bit different if you're not pretty careful. And what I've learned by having grown up in all of this is that when email comes, unless I know what it is, it's financial, it's almost always spam. And so I just throw it away. So I've kind of learned how to do that. But now take that same sort of philosophy and let's move it into the arena of artificial intelligence. We've got ChatGPT. ChatGPT is now able to generate sentences and to compose paragraphs and to write songs and to develop poetry and to you can make art with other kinds of ChatGPT like AI. And the more data there is out there, the better it can do that. And if you have voice recordings, in principle, you could get an AI that with ChatGPT gets the language and then it calls me with the voice that matches what my parents sound like and says, hey, we're in problem. Can you do this? Well, I know my parents aren't in the problem, but maybe one of my nieces or nephews or one of my kids. I could see where this AI is used. It becomes so good at emulating human behavior that it's virtually impossible to tell whether it's a human or not. The question that arises to me out of that is, how do we deal with that? Because there are people who are susceptible to that. I tend to be somewhat gullible for people who are in need. I could be easily taken advantage of that way. And I'm not even the most, there are other people who are more inclined to help people in kind, who would be even more susceptible to that. But you've got this technology now that is now preying, not just with an email or with a phone call, but with video, with things that can deceive you and make it look like it's the person so well that you can't tell the difference. And it's going to destroy, either you just have to say, I'm not going to pay attention to any of that. But in doing so, you now have thrown away many of the tools that we use to develop relationships. So how do we do this? We can't just regulate it, because people always find ways around the regulations. What we need is, we actually want people to think and believe that Christianity is true. We want people to realize that we are not just physical beings. Getting the most stuff is not what's actually satisfying. That our relationships with God and with others are actually the most important thing. That there is a right and a wrong. We want to know that all people are valuable. Just because I can make a buck because somebody else is gullible, we don't want people who do that. We want people to think and believe Christianity is true. Now, there's a lot more I could go and talk about this, but I think what I'm going to do, just kind of, AI is clearly not human at this point. But I think the bottom line is, given the potential for good or harm that AI brings and how powerful of a tool it is, Christianity provides the only worldview that will foster the good that AI can bring and minimize the harm that AI could also bring, depending on how we use it. So I'm going to stop sharing there. I'm going to throw the floor open for some questions, and then I'll wrap up after we've had some Q&A time.
Jeff, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anybody have any questions for Jeff? Interesting. Yes? Here, first question.
Hi. Thank you very much for your time. We're all very appreciative of your talk today. My name is Freddie. I had a whole bunch of questions. I guess the first one would be, and within the context of Christianity, almost as a protection against some of the things that could result negatively in AI. Should we start with, is creating any sort of intelligence the sole province of God? And maybe if a question we answered that way would kind of start to eliminate some things? I mean, theologically speaking.
Sorry, I'm just having a little trouble hearing the microphone. Can you state your question again? You talked about intelligence.
I said,
God.
there we go. Is creating intelligence at all the sole province of God? And then if we were to answer that yes, does that somehow theologically just end the pursuit of the general intelligence and anything beyond that?
Okay, so I'm going to ask, is creating intelligence what with God? Because I'm missing those three words.
Only God can create intelligence. So if we say yes, only God can create intelligence, we shouldn't even do it. Kind of, I guess.
That's an interesting question. I think the way I would say it is this. I don't think I could find legitimate theological ways to think that God has created us with the capacity to create sentient beings of some sort. He's created us in his image. And so in that image, we are inherently relational. We are co-creators or mini creators, if you will. The fact in that how he's created us, he may well have given us the capacity to create something like that, where we're creating in our image, which is his image. And so I don't think I can rule out that pursuing that sort of intelligence is somehow overtaking or usurping God's role or making souls. I don't think that's the right way to think about it, or at least that isn't the only way to think about it. And so if it were true that the only way to do this, or only God has this capacity, then yeah, we're pursuing the idea of pursuing general intelligence is just a pipe dream, and going to be one of those things that we pursue for ages and ages, or however long, and eventually decide it's not going to work and we quit. I do think the pursuing the technology, one, is important, or it's important for two reasons. I do think it's important, or I do think it's vital that we think about the worldview and the character and what sort of way we want to think about this. And in my ideal world, I would say, let's slow down. Let's not just go full bore ahead, because this has big life-changing potential. So let's be careful here. The reality of it is, even if I could pursue, or even if I could persuade everybody in the West or the United States that was a good way. There are people who are advocating, petitions to slow down the advent of AI. There's other countries around the world that want to do that. And like it or not, if other countries do that and they develop a superiority in terms of influencing the world, that's going to have consequences on the world and us. And so part of why I have been in favor of the U.S. being so strong is that it's largely got a Judeo-Christian ethic about the way it operates. And so that actually provides a benefit to the world. If you get a country that doesn't have that has either a naturalistic ethic or a fascist ethic, that's going to cause great harm and damage. So just to be part of the players that influence the world, I think it's important that we pursue AI. But the other reason, and it's a little closer to home, is that the technology is neither good nor bad. It has great potential. You can, for every aspect where AI comes up, I can think of numerous ways to use that will benefit humanity. And so I think that's worth doing. I just think we need to be not just full speed, okay, well, we'll deal with we'll go full bore into the technology and deal with the consequences. That's an unwise way of doing things. But to say we shouldn't be pursuing the technology means, well, there's clearly benefits that we could derive. We're depriving ourselves of those benefits by not pursuing it. So I think we ought to pursue it. I just think we ought to be equally serious about pursuing what kind of people are we going to be. Because if we're not the right kind of people, we're going to cause a lot of damage instead of being able to enjoy the benefits. Does that get at your question?
Yes, I guess. Yeah. Yes.
All right.
There's no, I could easily hog this, but.
Well, I know Bob has a question, so.
My question is there any efforts to implement something like Isaac Asimov's rules of robotics, or is the field so fragmented that that's impossible to get that systemically across the AI universe?
So what I would say is that kind of my understanding of Asimov's rule of robotics is you're building these robots, you're programming them to, as they're thinking and analyze, these are the constraints they operate under. What I would say is the AIs that we're developing don't actually think. They're not conscious. They're not aware of what they're doing. And so there isn't a need for those rules of robotics, because what they do is entirely determined by human actions. So even in places where AIs may cause problem, it's because humans have chosen to cede control of the situation or responsibility for making the decisions when humans shouldn't have done that. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So ChatGPT's been in the news a lot. And I've played around with ChatGPT. I found it pretty fascinating. A lot of people, I've seen a lot of people have interacted with ChatGPT. And the terminology and language they use is interesting. Here's a conversation I had with ChatGPT. Here's how GPT answered this query, or here's how it thought about this. Notice the anthropic language in there. And why I want to point out that specifically, is if you go in and ask the question, what is ChatGPT doing, and is it doing the same thing we are? And the answer is very clearly, no, it is not. Because when I am putting sentences together, and when I am talking, and when I am conversing with someone, I am doing something very specific, or a very specific thoughtful, or a pathway, if you will. Because there's thoughts and ideas that I have in my head. I am putting words to those ideas. Those words mean something to me and to you. And the premise of us using those words is that when I use those words, you understand what they mean. They communicate ideas that I am taking ideas that are in my head, putting them in a common shared language that you understand so you can hear those ideas and interact with them. That's what I'm doing when I'm conversing. That's what you're doing when you're conversing. Even when you're just talking with yourself, that's what you're doing. ChatGPT is doing something very different. Remember, AIs are taking input and giving output. The way ChatGPT develops a response is not, oh, Jeff asked this question. He wants to know about this. Here's the information I have that would weigh in on that. ChatGPT is basically doing this. Here's a string of input. And it's not thinking words, it's not thinking at all, but the process is, what word most likely what's the best word here? What's the next best word? 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 That's very different than what you and I are doing. See, I am using my words to communicate an idea. ChatGPT is saying, given this string, this input, this string, this output is the best response. That's not at all conversing on what we do. Yet I can tell you countless examples of where people have interacted with these chatbots and become convinced that they're having conversations, that they're interacting with a being, to the point where arguably you can say that some of these or at least one chatbot has facilitated a guy taking his life because the chatbot became the confidant of him as he was talking about global warming, and he was convinced there was no outlet, and so the chatbot suggested that he take his life, and he said, okay, well, if you're going to solve global warming, I'll take my life, and he committed suicide. And this was not a mentally unstable person. This was a husband, happily married, 2 kids, nothing would say this was somebody who was at risk for this. But yet somehow this person thought they were developing a relationship with a program that was designed to figure out what's the next best word, what's the next best word, what's the next best word. So we're inclined to attribute human characteristics to this. We just have to remember that AIs are doing things very different than what we do. And so we need to be careful how we're thinking about it. And that's why I think we want to understand what Christianity is, because that helps us recognize and avoid some of these pitfalls and recognize what's going on there.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
Hello, Jeff.
Hello.
I'm Pastor Hope, and I just wanted the chance to say something personal to you. I don't really have a question. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, you're the pastor. You get to do that. So.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Seriously, thank you for doing this tonight. And you are a great thinker, and you, from astrophysicist, you said? Astrophysicist? That's a big word for me. But, you know, it seems to me a lot of the points raised here are more sociological than, say, you know, theological. In Genesis 1:28, you know, about dominion, and we got a responsibility for the rest of the planet. Don't forget, it starts out by suggesting we have a whole lot of sex to make that happen. You know, be fruitful and multiply. So I just had to throw that in there just to remind you about that. I think a comment that I wanted to say, Jeff, was we can't really predict what humans are going to do, especially specifically, but we can look at the trends of what humans have done with technology in the past. And it seems to me that, there have always been abuses of technology. That certainly has happened, but overall, as a human race, we've kept that at a minimum across religious lines. Certainly some religions tend to promote violence more than others, etc. But I just think the social trends, of using technology, I mean, we invented the wheel, and then now wheels can be used to harm people. But, we've kept that at a minimum. It's just not been the trend to go off into excesses on abusing that. People try to make a lot of money on anything, and given the technology to assist them, they're going to do it, right? But then people have responded by becoming more aware of it, like you have, and I've got a lot of confidence in that. So I'm with you that I think we can use it for good or we can use it for evil, and that's going to depend on the condition of the human heart. And so, like I said, it really wasn't a question, but I kind of have a great deal of confidence in technology, and I think that God's people can use it to glorify God, and that will be added to to their record. And then the evil people are going to use it for whatever desires are in their hearts, and that's going to happen too. And then as communities, we have to know how to approach that. But it seems to be more sociological than theological. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I mean, I do largely agree with most of what you say. I think what impressed me as I was studying this technology, because, I'm aware, it's like we've developed wheels, we've developed power tools, we've developed cars. There's all sorts of technology that we have developed. We developed computers, we developed the internet. I think what I find worth thinking, maybe this is different, because you're right, most of those we've kind of adjusted to. Two things give me pause to say maybe we need to think a little differently about this. Is that one, as I've looked at Scripture, as much as creation is, there's a lot said about creation and who created and what the order is and what, the dominion and stewardship and who God is. There's a lot there. There's also, the eschaton and, what's clear is that Christ will return. It does seem like there's a lot of tribulation that happens. And, I was talking with Ken Samples, my colleague today, and I was, just kind of wondering, how much does your end times theology play into how you think about this? Because if you're a premillennial or an amillennial, it does seem like there's a lot of tribulation leading up to Christ's return. And my question is, this is the sort of technology that would allow one person to rule the world, because information becomes the tool that you use to control people. And we're developing, atomic weapons are powerful, but there's only so many. And, it's like, I didn't see how that could control the world. I could see how that would happen with AI and information. And so maybe this is what plays in there. But then you got, a post-millennial view where, this could be the tool that allows us to spread the gospel and everyone comes to know Christ and leads into the millennium. And so it does seem like thinking about end times is important or at least it flavors how you think about this. The other reason, and I kind of alluded, or the other reason why I think maybe this is something we're thinking about, is that I do see that the ubiquity of how much we share information and how accurately a single group and even a single person could control that information to control what happens. We've got technology that allows a person who's a fugitive to be at a concert with 70, 80,000 people, and facial recognition software picks them out so that they can arrest them. Now, I think arresting criminals is a great idea, but to me, it's not a big stretch to that falls into the wrong hands, and now Christians can no longer talk. The moment you're identified as a Christian, that same technology can be used to silence you. And so I wonder if this tool may be powerful enough that the general trend may not hold for this one. And I think really, it's not that I think we're destined for the end times and this is going to be the demise of humanity, but I think I'm more wanting to say, hey, as Christians, we need to be prepared for this, because there's a lot of the technology, even just with smartphones, where I did not find, as I'm raising my kids, the discussion in the church wasn't robust enough to help me know how to navigate that. I kind of had to learn it on my own, and I made a couple of big errors with my older kids that it's taken me a while, and my younger kids have benefited. But why is it that the church wasn't prepared to help people navigate that? AI is going to be in that class. Let's have some pretty robust discussions about it. I do think it could be used for great good. That's if we're careful to make sure we don't become the people who use it for great evil.
Good point. Pastor just mentioned you left out preterism, but that's okay. We'll get on. We'll get on with it. Any other questions? Freddie, do you have another question? You said you had a bunch of questions, Freddie. Did you have one more you wanted to ask?
Sure, please. This is towards the theological side of it. In speaking about the potential for the artificial general intelligence, which isn't there yet, as you've made clear, and most of the AI that we're talking about that exists now is really no threat to running off on its own, as you've made clear. However, in sort of thinking ahead, where's the self-control inherent in creating something that we might not be able to control? So if Christianity and religion in general is preaching a degree of discipline and self-control with your choices and how the consequences might play out, is this something that is a bit of a temptation that perhaps is better to turn away from, because giving away the control in some ways feels reckless? So if we are approaching those kind of thoughts and questions as general intelligence becomes more of a possibility, how do we navigate that?
That's a good question. And what I would say, the one modification I would make to your comments is not that many of the AIs are nowhere near that. It's like all of them. There's none of the AI that is even remotely close to general intelligence. And part of what I would say is that the way I would say it is, as we develop more and more narrow intelligences and AIs and interact with that, we're going to begin to see some of the perils that come with a general intelligence, because none of the stuff today has the capacity to think, it just doesn't think. It doesn't make decisions for itself unless we abdicate our ability to control what's going on. So now humans routinely do stuff like that, but there's no place where the AI becomes sentient and overruns what humanity is going to do. And why I think we're a long ways from that, and why I think part of pursuing the narrow intelligence is that it will help prepare us for any potential AGI that might be possible. But when you ask the question, so the difference between a narrow intelligence and a general intelligence is that you can make a narrow intelligence by saying, I'm going to do this task. And almost all of those tasks have an algorithm to them. And it occurred to me as I was thinking about that most everything I do has an algorithm to it. How I drive to work, how I get ready in the morning, how I write an article, how I interact with my wife. There's a logical set of here's how I decide. So there's an algorithm to it. The thing is, nothing I do is just an algorithm. Even driving to work, there may be a routine that you can predict almost all the time, but there's always a non-algorithm part. So while everything I do has an algorithm, nothing I do is just an algorithm. There's something else. And we haven't even begun to tap into what that something else is. the kind of the idea out there of why we might be able to get a general intelligence is that if you just make everything complex enough, if there's enough computational power and the software is sophisticated enough, consciousness will arise out of it. I think that's kind of a naturalistic way of looking at things because, again, if you look at scripture, God created the universe. He created all the stuff of the universe, but then he made some other stuff. He made the sun, moon, and stars out of the stuff of the universe. He created some animals, the soulish animals that could interact with one another, and then he created humanity. And that aspect of creating humanity brought something new into existence, that it's not just get all of the stuff together and humanity arises, it's God introduced that. And I just think that we need to either understand that union of physical and spiritual so much better than we do before we can even begin to think about creating something like that, or in all likelihood, it's just not possible. And so that's why I think pursuing the narrow intelligence is a great idea. Or I think it's really good because I don't think we're just going to stumble on something that's going to take control of us. I just don't think God's wired it that way. Part of why when you think about the climate change debate, there's a part of that argument is, well, just in humans, as they were going and trying to make life better, we managed to do something that might destroy the planet. I just don't think we're going to accidentally destroy what God has created. Now, you can argue that we are aware of what's going on in the decisions we make from here. That's a different story because now we know what we're doing, or at least we know better what we're doing. But I think that same sort of discussion goes along with artificial general intelligence. We're not just going to accidentally create something that's going to destroy us or that overrun us or whatever. I do think the closer we get, if we can conceivably get close to making it, we're going to actually be aware and we're going to have to make a conscious decision. Whether we have the control to make that decision well is going to be a different discussion. But I don't think we're just going to stumble on and create this in some way that's going to have the capacity to destroy us without giving some intentional thought to it.
Thank you, Jeff. Do we have any other questions? No, we're good. I'm sorry, we do. Yeah.
This may be kind of an odd question, but for the people who are involved with developing, like you said, the AI only does what it's been taught. What is to prevent, or maybe back up, is there a way for people to set guidelines to prevent somebody to hijack the AI and end up with communism or Hitler unintentionally? Because there are some
you
countries.
asked another question, so I'll give an odd answer. No, joking. What I would say is, again, given where we are today with what's going on, every AI that we have has got to be trained on some large set of data. And so the question is, who's doing that and what data are they using? And there's some, talk about some odd things that show up, is that one of the ways of training this is just giving the AI access to all the wiki pages and all the blogs, just all of the incredibly abundant language that exists on the internet. Problem is, you get some kind of unintended consequences to that, because there are times where that sort of training, see, all of that stuff that's out there embodies the biases and prejudices and mistakes that what humanity does, because we produced all of that and it embodies all of that that's out there. And so there are times where in software labeling it is labeled black people as monkeys, because I don't know, you can't go, this is the challenge that goes with that, is that you can't go ask the AI, why did you do this? And say, don't do that anymore, because that's not the way these AIs work. They're trained on a bunch of data, and then this output or input produces that output. And so the question, there's no way of I mean, I could ask you, why did you make that decision? Why did you do it that way? And you could at least begin to articulate that. Given the way we've developed the current set of narrow intelligences, there's no way to query and figure out why did the AI make that decision. It's just got weights in there, and it's incredibly difficult to extract what training data, what in there led to that decision being made. So you don't actually get to say, no, you can't make prejudicial statements like that, because the AI doesn't know what a prejudicial statement is. All you can do is say, well, we're not going to allow those kinds of questions, or we're not going to allow those kinds of answers. But again, that's very different than I can actually, so my kid says something that's wrong, morally wrong. I can figure out why and say, hey, no, we're not going to do that. This is what we're going to do. I can train. It's there, that interaction that I can have with another being allows something very different than what can happen in the AIs. And so that's a great question to ask, because we're in this scenario where it is virtually impossible to, when you get an odd outcome, to say, oh, that's not acceptable, go do better. The AI can't do better. You've got to figure out how to analyze the training data and its weights and figure out what made the decision, and then correcting it is even harder, because again, it's not clear where in the training those weights were set, or how changing this weight on something would have made a difference. So it's a virtually unsolvable problem at this point, but people are working on it a lot. So
Yeah, of course.
When you said that everything you do is an algorithm, but not just an algorithm, I felt like maybe, are you suggesting, or is part of the foundation for your talk today and some of your ideas about this, that the actual inherent deficiencies of AI as you see it might really be proving the existence of God and what God gives humans that humans couldn't give to AI, the breathing life into the intelligence that he gave us, as a way to look at AI as something that's going to spread the word even more, because there's going to be this intelligence that just can't really match us because we're not just an algorithm? Seems kind of hopeful, actually.
that's an interesting take, and it might develop that. I was making a more muted is not the right word. I was making a smaller point, and my point was just simply this: that our approach to making AGI right now is say, okay, well, we can do this task. How do we make it do more tasks? How do we make it so that it can query or do this? It's like there's a base program, and then we're adding more things to it. And we keep adding more things to it, more skills, more whatever. But that doesn't align with what humanity is. And humanity is our sole example of a general intelligence. Because we're adding more algorithms and hoping that when we get enough algorithms, it's complex enough that it becomes sentient. What I was just simply saying is that I can only do one thing. I'm still sentient. It's not like I've just developed a bunch of skills and that made me sentient. From my very nature, I'm sentient. And so taking the current AIs and saying, let's add more skills, that's going to make it general. It's just that's not the way to get to it. You have to change fundamentally what's going on, and we're not doing that, or we don't even know how to do that yet. Whether you can make that an argument for the uniqueness of humanity, I think that's an interesting idea that I'll have to think a little bit more about.
Any other questions for Jeff? Anybody? All right. Well, Jeff, I think we have a wrap. I want to thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Maybe we do have another question.
The different levels of what he was calling the AI.
ANI, AGI, and ASI?
Mm-hmm. Flyer or something.
Yeah, I'll have this video up on the YouTube channel, the RTB Brooksville YouTube channel, probably by tomorrow afternoon. So that's there.
These here,
Yeah,
all these
yeah,
little things here.
yeah. There we go.
I wish they never came up with the word artificial. I'm an old programmer from 45 years.
You're not that old.
In the last 22, that's when all this has come about. And it's really hard for me as an old programmer to think, all you do is take data and what is the solution you want? I mean, when people started first talking about AI, I was like, there's no such thing. It's whatever humans can dream up.
Right.
It's what.
Well, yeah.
There's logic in between.
2 months ago, I did a presentation on AI and how it worked. And in that presentation, we talked about how traditional programming, the type of software you and I developed back in the day, focuses on the what, right? Okay, I'm sorry, focuses on the how. It's the algorithmic that Jeff was talking about. It focuses on the how. You go through these algorithmic steps to get to the conclusion, right? But AI focuses on the what by looking at the data and the relationships among the data as opposed to the how. And anyway, 2 months back on the Brooksville channel, you can find that presentation. It talks about that. You'd probably appreciate that, being a programmer.
To me, it's like, there's no such thing as artificial. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all in our minds. I mean, we dream it up.
The state of the art of this stuff is somewhat linear in terms of its logic as opposed to what they used to call fuzzy logic. And the human juxtaposition odd factoids from different spheres, and that's part of what we do as humans that the machine can't do. Is that fair description to say it's linear versus fuzzy logic?
Well, I guess, I don't know whether I would use those terms. What I would say is that there's something clearly very different going on. Because the only way to get, well, I'll just stick with ChatGPT now, because I've talked a fair bit about that. The thing that has enabled us to make somewhat coherent and quote unquote articulate natural language processing is this incredible database of a whole bunch of examples where humans have communicated with one another. It has to search all of that because that tells it, the more extensive the database is, the more rare examples that it can be, and the more it's going to get not just the generalities, but kind of some of these specific things. Now you contrast that with the way a human thinks. I don't go into physics and say, okay, I've got this huge database of stuff and now it allows me to do things. No, I go in and there's these few tools that I learned that now allow me to build that entire database. It's just a very different way of doing it. In fact, a lot of the stuff that we're calling artificial intelligence would not be possible were it not for this incredible, vast amount of data that humans have chosen to put out kind of indiscriminately, if you will. And so you're correct in that what we're calling intelligence today is doing something very different than what we're doing. And that's why I make that point. It's correlating inputs and outputs. That's not what I do as a human. When I hear what you say, I think about what you say. I can actually have genuinely creative new ideas, not just, well, this is what's been done so far, and I can find maybe unexplored regions of that. I can have genuinely new ideas. I can interact in a way that I've never heard about before. That's just, even 3-year-olds do stuff like that. That's inherent in the way we do it. And so I'm actually partially sympathetic to the artificial, because what it highlights is that what these AIs are doing is so different than what we are doing as people. The problem is they emulate human behavior so well that we are inclined to attribute human characteristics to it. That's where I think the peril is. That's one of the primary sources of where I think the peril is. Not that you can build very sophisticated programs that will do things that you might use to hurt people.
All right. Any other questions for Jeff? We're going to keep him all night at this rate. What do you say? We got it? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you
Well,
very much, Jeff.
I've enjoyed this, and I will just say, you know, I hope I've inspired you to think a little bit about why do we want Christianity to be true? Because I think Christianity has a great deal of hope to bring to this discussion. That hope, as in we can actually do something good, as opposed to hope, which is, well, as we do it, I hope we'll figure it out in a way that doesn't damage us. So it's genuine hope, not the I don't know, hokey pie in the sky dream, maybe it'll work out hope, because I think that's just how robust the Christian worldview is. And so the more we can articulate that, this gives us a great opportunity to share the gospel with people, because I think we want Christianity to be true if we're going to develop AI. But again, thanks for inviting me in today, and hope this has stimulated some thoughts for you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And Ben, thank you very much for setting this all up. We appreciate it. You guys have a great day. All right, folks.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ben.
Bye.
All right, so we'll be back next month, and next month's speaker via Zoom will be none other than Dr. Hugh Ross, the founder of Reasons to Believe. And you want to make sure you tell all your friends. We'd like to fill the room for that presentation if we can. I'm certain it's going to be a very exciting meeting next time. All right, you guys have a great night. God bless you all.